The Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith. Part 1 of the Propriety of Actions, consisting of 3 sections. Section 2 of the Degrees of the different passions which are consistent with propriety. Chapter 1 of the passions which take their origin from the body. 1. It is indecent to express any strong degree of those passions which arise from a certain situation or disposition of the body, because the company, not being with the same disposition, cannot be expected to sympathize with them. Violent hunger, for example, though upon many occasions not only natural but avoidable, is always indecent, and to eat voraciously is universally regarded as a piece of ill manners. There is, however, some degree of sympathy, even with hunger. It is agreeable to see our companions eat with a good appetite, and all expressions of loathing are offensive. The disposition of body, which is habitual to a man in health, makes his stomach easily keep time, if I may be allowed so coarse an expression, with the one and not with the other. We can sympathize with the distress in which excessive hunger occasions, when we read the description of a journal of a siege or a sea voyage. We imagine ourselves in the situation of the sufferers, and thence readily conceive the grief, the fear, and the consternation, which must necessarily distract them. We feel ourselves some degree of those passions, and therefore sympathize with them, but as we do not grow hungry by reading the description, we cannot properly, even in this case, be said to sympathize with their hunger. It is the same case with the passion by which nature unites the two sexes. Though naturally the most furious of all passions, all strong expressions of it are upon every occasion indecent, even between persons in whom its most complete indulgence is acknowledged by all laws, both human and divine, to be perfectly innocent. There seems, however, to be a degree of sympathy even with the passion. To talk to a woman as we would to a man is improper. It is expected that their company should inspire us with more gaiety, more pleasantry, and more attention, and an entire sensibility to the fair sex renders a man contemptible in some measure even to the man. Such is our aversion for all the appetites which take their origin from the body. All strong expressions of them are loathsome and disagreeable. According to some ancient philosophers, these are the passions which we share in common with the brutes, and which have no connection with the characteristical qualities of human nature, are upon that account beneath its dignity. But there are many other passions which we share in common with the brutes, such as resentment, natural affection, and even gratitude, which do not upon that account appear to be so brutal. The true cause of the peculiar disgust which we conceive for the appetites of the body when we see them in other men is that we cannot enter into them. To the person himself who feels them, as soon as they are gratified, the object that excited them ceases to be agreeable. Even its presence often becomes offensive to him. He looks round to no purpose for the charm which transported him from the moment before, and he can now as little enter into his own passion as another person. When we have dined, we order the covers to be removed, and we should treat in the same manner the objects of the most ardent and passionate desires, if they were the objects of no other passions but those which take their origin from the body. In the command of those appetites of the body consists that virtue is properly called temperance. To restrain them from within those bounds which regard to health and fortune prescribes is part of the prudence, but to confine them within those limits which grace, which propriety, which delicacy, and modesty require, is the office of temperance. 2. It is for the same reason that to cry out with bodily pain, however intolerable soever, appears always unmanly and unbecoming. There is, however, a good deal of sympathy even with bodily pain. If, as already been observed, I see a stroke aimed, and just ready to fall upon the leg or arm of another person, I naturally shrink and draw back my own leg or my own arm, and when it does fall, I feel it in some measure, and I am hurt by it as well as the sufferer. My hurt, however, is no doubt excessively slight, and upon that account, if he makes any violent outcry, as I cannot go along with him, I never fail to despise him. And this is the case of all the passions which take their origin from the body. They excite either no sympathy at all, or such a degree of it as it is altogether disproportioned to the violence of what is felt by the sufferer. It is quite otherwise with those passions which take their origin from the imagination. The frame of my body can be but little affected by the alterations which are brought about upon that of my companion, but my imagination is more ductile, and more readily assumes, if I may say so, the shape and configuration of the imaginations of those with whom I am familiar. A disappointment in love or ambition will, upon this account, call forth more sympathy than the greatest bodily evil. The passions arise altogether from the imagination. The person who has lost his whole fortune, if he is in health, feels nothing in his body. What he suffers from is the imagination only, which represents to him the loss of his dignity, neglect from his friends, contempt from his enemies, dependence, want, and misery coming fast upon him, and we sympathize with him more strongly upon this account, because our imaginations can more readily mount themselves upon his imagination than our bodies can mount themselves upon his body. The loss of a leg may generally be regarded as a more real calamity than the loss of a mistress. It would be a ridiculous tragedy, however, of which the catastrophe was to turn upon a loss of that kind. A misfortune, on the other kind, how frivolous soever it may appear to be, has given occasion to many a fine one. Nothing is so soon forgot as pain. The moment it is gone, the whole agony of it is over, and the thought of it can no longer give us any sort of disturbance. We ourselves cannot enter into the anxiety and anguish which we had before conceived. An unguarded word from a friend will occasion a more durable uneasiness. The agony which this creates is by no means over with the word. What at first disturbs us is not the object of the senses, but the idea of the imagination, as it is an idea, therefore, which occasions our uneasiness. Till time and other accidents have in some measure effaced it from our memory, the imagination continues to fret and rankle within from the thought of it. Pain never calls forth any very lively sympathy, unless it is accompanied with danger. We sympathize with the fear, though not with the agony of the sufferer. Fear, however, is the passion derived altogether from the imagination, which represents, with an uncertainty and fluctuation, that increases our anxiety, not what we really feel, but what we may hereafter possibly suffer. The gout or the toothache, though exquisitely painful, excite very little sympathy; more dangerous diseases, though accompanied with very little pain, excite the highest. Some people faint and grow sick at the sight of a chirurgical operation, and that bodily pain which is occasioned by tearing the flesh seems in them to excite the most excessive sympathy. We conceive in a much more lively and distinct manner the pain which proceeds from external cause, than we do that which arises from an internal disorder. I can scarce form an idea of the agonies of my neighbor when he is tortured with the gout or the stone, but I have the clearest conception of what he must suffer from an incision, a wound, or a fracture. The chief cause, however, why such objects produce such violent effects upon us, is their novelty. One who has been witness to a dozen dissections and as many amputations, sees ever after all operations of this kind with great indifference, and often with perfect insensibility. Though we have read or seen represented more than 500 tragedies, we shall seldom feel so entire an abatement of our sensibility to the objects which they represent to us. In some of the Greek tragedies there is an attempt to excite compassion, by the representation of the agonies of bodily pain. Philoctetes cries out and faints from the extremity of his sufferings. Hippolytus and Hercules are both introduced as expiring under the severest tortures, which, it seems, even the fortitude of Hercules was incapable of supporting. In all these cases, however, it is not the pain which interests us, but some other circumstances. It is not the sore foot, but the solitude of Philoctetes which affects us, and diffuses over that charming tragedy that romantic wildness which is so agreeable to the imagination. The agonies of Hercules and Hippolytus are interesting only because we foresee that death is to be the consequence. If those heroes were to recover, we should think the representation of their suffering perfectly ridiculous. What a tragedy would that be of which the distress consisted in a colic! Yet no pain is more exquisite. These attempts to excite compassion by the representation of bodily pain may be regarded as the greatest breaches of decorum, of which the Greek theatre has set the example. The little sympathy which we feel with bodily pain is the foundation of the propriety of constancy and patience in enduring it. The man who under the severest tortures allow no weakness to escape him, vents no groan, gives way to no passion which we do not entirely enter into, commands our highest admiration. His firmness enables him to keep time with our indifference and insensibility. We admire and entirely go along with his magnanimous effort which he makes for this purpose. We approve of his behavior, and from our experience of the common weakness of human nature, we are surprised, and wonder how he should be able to act so as to deserve approbation. Approbation, mixed and animated by wonder and surprise, constitutes the sentiment which is properly called admiration, of which applause is the natural expression, as has already been observed.